Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. My topic this afternoon, or our topic this afternoon, environment, climate and sustainable development, has mobilized politicians, planners, researchers, activists and the general public around the world for decades. Research, debate, conferences and negotiations have kept the goals of protecting our planet and ensuring a sustainable future for coming generations high on the political agenda. The urgency of the issue is well illustrated by the clearly documented risks to the planet posed by climate change and the crises that the world has experienced in recent years. Food crises with devastating effects in Africa and major natural disasters with significant loss of life. At the same time, there's been a long, impressive history of feminist efforts to bring attention to women and gender equality perspectives in all areas of environment, climate and sustainable development. Women's organizations and networks provided much of the initial impetus and leadership and continue to play a key role today. Efforts to link women and gender equality issues to environment and sustainable development, particularly at local levels, while clearly identifying women's specific vulnerabilities, also led to heightened understanding of women's essential contributions and their key roles as agents of change. An increasing awareness that the goals related to environment and sustainable development, and more recently those directly linked to climate change, are not achievable without the equitable involvement and contributions of women as well as men. The highlighting of women and the environment as one of the 12 critical areas of concern in the Beijing Platform for Action in '95 was an important outcome of this work. In this presentation, I'm going to highlight some of the challenges and the potentials in efforts to move forward in the area of climate change. Many of the issues linked to climate change, such as energy, water, forests, biodiversity, and global warming, as well as critical patterns of behavior, such as land use and consumption, had long been on the global agenda, and efforts were already well underway to bring attention to women and gender equality in these areas. Climate change, however, added new challenges to this ongoing work. It is not yet sufficiently recognized that climate change is not gender neutral. Gender inequalities intersect directly with climate risks and vulnerabilities. Because of their responsibilities for food security, provision of household water and energy, and income-generating activities relying on natural resources, women in many parts of the world, in rural areas, can be disproportionately affected by the changes and shifts in their local environment. These women are more at risk because of their strong dependencies on climate-sensitive natural resources for their livelihoods. Long-standing gender inequalities, such as lack of access to and control over essential resources, including credit, technology, and information, limited decision-making potential and bargaining power at the household and community levels, and time poverty due to their multiple roles, can constrain women in their capacity to adapt to rapidly changing climate conditions. At the same time, it's very important to keep in mind that women are not only vulnerable, but are also powerful agents of change, with knowledge and experience and contributions which are critical to mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change. In many high-risk areas in the world, women have unique knowledge of local conditions and environmentally safe practices, which can be invaluable in building resilience and strengthening the adaptive capacities of both households and communities. All areas of climate change action, assessment of loss and damage, mitigation, adaptation, financing, technology, and capacity building have gender equality dimensions which need to be explicitly addressed, both in order to enhance the effectiveness and the sustainability of the interventions and to ensure that actions taken do not exacerbate existing gender inequalities. So the nationally appropriate mitigation actions and national adaptation plans established under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change should build on and benefit from women's valuable experience and skills and their potential as agents of change. Despite the fact that many of the climate change success stories are at community levels, local groups often face barriers to accessing and benefiting from existing public and private equity funds and from capacity building interventions. If we look back on the gender equality work in this area over the past 20 years, we can certainly see much has been achieved. But nonetheless, there are many serious constraints and challenges to achieving the goals that governments set for themselves in the Beijing platform. The big question at this Nording Forum is how to create new momentum to ensure that we move forward. As in many other areas, there's perhaps not so much a need to build completely new strategies as the need to seriously review and revitalize implementation of those strategies we have. It is clear that in many cases, implementation efforts have only been very half-hearted and have never ever been seriously resourced. Ensuring a stronger focus on the local level and on socioeconomic factors is one key entry point for strengthening the work. Technical and financial solutions are certainly critical for meeting the challenges of climate change, but these will only be successful if attention is paid to the social context in which such solutions are to be implemented. Recent attention to climate justice and to human rights perspectives on climate change provides us with potential to enhance attention to gender equality. And focus on strong stakeholder engagement also provides new opportunities. One of the greatest challenges is the persistent over-focus on women as victims. Although it's much less common than a decade ago, it's still possible to find women listed together in important documents with children, disempowered youth, the elderly, and the sick and the disabled as vulnerable groups. It's critical to go beyond this victim vulnerable group focus to recognize women's essential contributions as enablers of change, particularly those roles beyond the family and household level. At the same time, what is not needed is more rhetoric on women's roles and responsibilities and contributions. We know already that women are critical agents of change, but recognition of this should lead to practical action, to specific changes in goals, in policies, budgets, strategies, and programs on the ground. Strong and innovative efforts have been made over many years to ensure that gender balance is secured, gender equality experts are involved, and gender equality perspectives taken into account in the processes through which key global policies and conventions are negotiated and agreed. This is critical work, since these policies and conventions guide work on climate change at all levels. Some successes have been achieved, but overall progress has been slow and the outcomes uneven. More progress has been made on the Convention on Biodiversity and the UN Convention to Combat Desertification than in the context of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change agreed for the very first time on text on women's participation and gender equality in 2001. More recent examples of progress include texts stating that gender equality and women's participation are necessary for effective action on all aspects of climate change, which was included in the outcome of the Climate Change Conference in Cancun in 2010. What remains now is concerted efforts to ensure full implementation of these outcomes in the context of the work on the Framework Convention. This will require the development of strong follow-up and accountability mechanisms. References to gender balance, women's participation, and sex disaggregated statistics are reasonably concrete and measurable. But the short, vague references in many agreements to increasing attention to gender-sensitive approaches, gender considerations, gender aspects, and gender as a cross-cutting issue need to be unpacked in terms of concrete, practical implications. What does this mean for mitigation? What does it mean for adaptation, for technology, for financing, and capacity building? This work of influencing important global processes has entered a critical phase now with the upcoming climate change conferences in Lima and in Paris over the coming year, in preparation for the negotiation of a new climate change convention in 2015. This is a unique opportunity which must be fully utilized. Many gender specialists are at this moment working to influence these processes at a preparatory meeting in Bonn, trying to promote gender equality as a fundamental principle for the new convention and to identify entry points for new actions. A key strategy in this context must be to build strong alliances, to be able to show in real terms how challenging gender inequalities and stereotypes and securing rights and empowerment for women will maximise the efficiency and the effectiveness of interventions and resources and contribute positively to the achievement of climate change goals. Non-governmental organisations are often the driving force behind efforts to influence global policies and conventions. In recent years, there's been an increased positive practice of alliances between NGOs and UN agencies and NGOs and governments. And this has resulted in greater access by gender equality specialists to important processes and more effective common efforts to secure attention to gender equality perspectives. Civil society organisations have also done very strategic work in some countries to develop climate change and gender action plans at national level, which provide good practice examples on what can be done in practical terms. The contributions of women's groups and women's networks should be further acknowledged and new partnerships and more strategic opportunities for collaboration developed. What I prioritise post-2015 to create new momentum is strong, visible leadership and accountability from those in positions of power and responsibility, while gender equality activists and practitioners within NGOs and research organisations and government organisations will continue to play critical roles. This work cannot be left entirely up to them. Those with real power over goals, policies, plans, budgets and strategies must face up to their responsibilities, and we must become much, much better at finding ways to hold those in power accountable. It is time for serious leadership to produce more substantial gender equality outcomes in the area of climate change. Thank you.